Now that everyone is receiving their tools from the Kickstarter, and I've got my remaining 2 as well, I wanted to make a beginner's guide to talk about the GOAT tool, the multi-tool that is completely modular in design. I think it's worth it because there are a few things you can do right away that dramatically improve the user experience of this tool. And also I can talk about some of the additions, some of the modifications you can do that will make it even better from there. So let's go ahead and get started. It's going to be a long video, but hopefully very informative. Because we're going to spend so much time specifically on the tool set, the items that go on the back side, I want to get out of the way everything relating to the pliers first and foremost. So we're going to use the newest version primarily for this video. We're going to talk about what it looks like in its stock orientation and all the things you're going to want to know with it, beginning with the plier head. We're going to move everything else out of the way. The plier head has a couple additional features that are worth talking about. The first one is the hammering end at the back. So it's mostly for persuading. That's kind of how I would recommend it be used. And actually the best way to grip it isn't like this, because whatever you're hitting could potentially impact your hand. Try it in this form. This is going to actually give you a surprising amount of force, and because of the flexibility in your hand, the impact won't go all the way in, which is great. That's what I've been able to do with the Signal, and the same thing is true here. Kind of basically make a trigger, there you go, and then just wrap your hand. So I definitely recommend doing that for the hammering side. Now the tension on these M3 screws is really important to keep the tool closed. So you may have to adjust it in yours one way or another. And you do that with a 2mm Allen key, or you can also use a T8 in a pinch. I don't necessarily recommend that, but if you only had one of each, that is something you can use to adjust it. You'll notice also there's a washer between the frame and the plier, so even when you tighten it down a lot, it's still quite smooth. Now if we open the plier head, we're going to notice right away that they are spring-loaded in nature, and this tool can only be spring-loaded because the pressure of the spring against this frame is what's keeping it usable for the most part. I think you would have to have these tightened down quite a bit for it not to be spring-loaded, in other words. So that's something of mention. And because these are outboard accessible tools, one of the things you'll notice about whether it's a Swiss tool or this, there is always flex in the handle. And it's not something to be concerned with. Now notice I'll squeeze it and I'll be able to pull it down pretty well. And what you're feeling is the give in this spring. So this spring actually flexes as you press down. It's actually a really nice design. And so you're not going to break it. It's simply loading up the pressure in the plier. So if I squeeze it really hard, yes, I can get them closed pretty far, but it's nothing to worry about because this is taking all of that energy and redistributing it back into the plier head. So very, very neat little design. And the other thing to mention here is you have replaceable cutters that have a 2mm screw as well. So you can still use the inner tool to adjust it. And you're not gonna have to worry about really replacing these. Now you can buy spares, and I did for me personally, but because these are hardened steel instead of carbide, like in some other tools, you can simply rotate this and use another one of the 3 blades. So reality is that it's going to take a very, very long time to need to replace these. And there's a good chance that you will break this plier before having to ever replace these cutters, just because of how long they're likely to last and the heat treatment on them. Yeah, it's going to take a very, very long time. So from here, we're going to focus almost exclusively on the inner tools and how you can make this a better system. One of the first things you do when you get a multi-tool, besides playing with the pliers obviously, is to try to deploy the blade. Now, if you notice, when I do this one-handed on the GOAT tool, it pulls out both the locking bar, right, and the bit holder. Now there's a couple reasons for that. Number one is the friction between everything. Because this is a modular tool system, there's no spacers between any of the tools. Clumping is a natural consequence of doing exactly that. But there's an added piece to this because the magnet for the bit driver is on the side rather than in the back. Now this allows the bit driver to be utilized with many different types of bits, which is pretty cool. However, it does have the consequence of actually pushing the bit driver even harder against the blade. There is, however, a solution. Now, before I get to that, I also want to point out that when the blade is closed, the lock bar cannot be pressed down to release. So if I pull out the bit driver here, like so, if I want to disengage it, I can't do it by pressing down on any of the outer tools. They don't actually work that way. I'd have to lift the bar in order to change it. And the problem with doing that is it exposes the pivot to being able to potentially pop the tool out. So it's not a great solution. There is, however, a very easy fix, and it's the first thing you should do the moment you get your tool. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to undo the bar completely. It has a little stopping point. This rotates the pivot all the way out so that when you're in the open position, you can pop out the blade. So we'll open this up completely, slide this out, put that down, and then we're going to open up the other side and take out the craft blade. And we're going to swap these two in the different places. And this actually creates a solution. This is the way it should always come because it actually solves multiple problems at once. So let me put this back in here like so and close. And there you go. So now when the bit driver is open, you can actually press down on the lock bar because of the cutout in the craft blade holder. There's enough space to actually press down. And on this side, when any of the other tools, like if you pull out any single tool, you can press down on these long implements, the center implements, to disengage the lock. You don't even have to press or pull up on this. You can push this down, and that will actually disengage any of the other implements. It basically causes the lock bar to flex. And you can see the two longer implements, they don't function this way. They're all the way up towards the flex point. And then the other four tools are back here, pushing down on the lock bar. So you can actually gain enough leverage to flex it. It does require a lot of pressure to do that. Now, a lot of people were concerned when they saw me show it the first time that I could squeeze this and cause it to fail. But that's actually not the case, which is a very, very good thing. And so I definitely don't think you're going to have to worry about that. You basically are being protected by the fact that the longer implement on the opposite side does not push down. And you have to press, not here, you have to press like all the way out on the edge in order to disengage the lock. One of the other awesome things about the Go tool is that you can go from being a right-hander to a left-hander very, very quickly. So what you're going to want to do in order to do that, especially when you've changed it already with the saw and the straight blade on the same side, is you can simply open this up, take this out, and swap it around with the saw. Now this will not work, and this is very important, this is why I wanted to bring it up. It will not work with the scissor. Now you notice there's a spacer there. The scissor is a little bit wider, so it actually takes up that extra space. So you can't replace it with that tool. So we then put the blade back in here. We slide this over. This is a little, I shouldn't have done it in this order. So put that in there. And then you have to move that washer over. This is a little bit on the finicky side. And there you go. And then lock this back in place. And now you have your left-handed capable tool. So same thing now, and it works left-handers. And if you want to manipulate the pocket clip, you can actually take this off and put it into any of the 4 locations. So one of the things that makes this special is that it is a left-hand capable tool right off the bat without buying any additional items. And that is something different in the marketplace. Now I had, in addition to this, another concern. You saw as I'm deploying the blade that things still come out a little bit. And the reason is simply friction. Everything is right next to each other. And so there are a couple of things that you could do to alleviate this. I did it with mine. So if you notice, I have these small brass washers. And this allows me to deploy the blade without actually pulling out anything else. So I do really like that. And you might not have seen it because I did it so quickly, but I pushed down, let me do it again. In order to disengage it, I reach all the way out to the end of these middle tools, push down, and that unlocks the tool. I could also push down on the lock bar, but I find that to be less comfortable. Now, in all three of these, there is a little bit of up and down play. And I'm not sure that there's anything they could really do about that, for the simple fact that these tools, let me grab one of these, have an open pivot, right? The way this is designed, it's just comes with the territory. You're going to have a little up and down play. It doesn't seem to affect it from a safety perspective. You just may notice that and wondering if, oh, is there anything that can be done? I don't know if anything could be done, for the simple fact that there's always going to be a place for that lock bar to move up and down in that channel. So there's that. Now, you might have noticed in my version that I've had for a while that in order to put these washers in, I had to reduce the number of middle implements by 1. So what I did is I took out that 2mm Allen key. Well, then you're wondering, okay, so if I take out the 2mm Allen key, how am I going to adjust the tool when necessary? And that's the beauty of having interchangeable parts. So I used an M3 screw with a Phillips head. And so now, in order to adjust it, all I have to do is take out the bit driver, and then I can use the bit driver to adjust the tension. So I basically get to eliminate one of those tools. And in the future, I'm going to show you, I'm actually going to put another fourth tool back in while still solving this problem. And so this is a good example of how I can integrate the bottle opener, can opener. The way I'm able to do that is, instead of using these off-the-shelf brass washers, I'm going to use these. These are little Shim washers, right? They are 5mm inner, 8mm outer diameter, and they have a 0.2mm thickness. So they're very, very thin. Plenty of thinness to allow me to put the fourth tool back in while still having some space to prevent friction between the tools. The other thing that you could do here, that you could do yourself, and maybe Goat Tools should consider in the future, is both the inner side of the lock bar and also the area around that with the blades could be polished. And if they polish them, then there's a lot less friction. If there's less friction, it'll be much smoother, if that makes sense. So the cool thing about this tool is all the little problems that I've discovered along the way had pretty immediate solutions and are supported by the company itself. They basically say, okay, go ahead and manipulate it. We don't really care, because they can replace individual components. They don't send it back to the warranty team. They simply send a new component right away. So it actually makes it a lot simpler to change things out in the future. All right, from there, what do we want to talk about? Let me think. Let's talk about the bits and the bit kits that are available for this thing. Now, it doesn't come with additional bits, but I don't think it's going to be necessary. Now, once you get this deployed, which isn't as easy because it doesn't have a nail nick section, but I get why, because that would actually reduce the strength, and I think I'd rather have the strength personally. So in order to disengage it, you press down. Remember, I moved the tools around so that now I have access to this bar. So press that down, and then to get it, you pull everything out and then manipulate to get the bit driver and lock in place. Now we'll notice this is actually much more in line than something like the Leatherman Wave and many, many other multi-tools out there, and I really, really like that aspect of it. There's some other tricks it has up its sleeve as well. And so let's go ahead and pull this out for a second and take a look. You can see that this has no ball detent. It's just a standard double-sided bit. And there's another place that you can find those very, very easily. And they're actually some of the best bits that you can possibly buy, made by a company called Wiha. Now, these are actually made in the USA, funny enough, even though it's a German company. And they have some of the best bits of any company that I have seen. Incredible durability, and all of these will fit in this bit driver. Now, the way it works, it engages with the magnet engages it kind of on the side versus on the bottom. It does a couple of things that is an advantage here. Number one, if you put a lot of pressure in it, using these double-sided bits, you're not going to be cracking that magnet, which is really good. And it's also going to let you use different styles of bits at the same time. So this is actually a really genius design. So that works. You also have standard hex bits, of course. So does it work with those? It does. And the reason it does is because the magnet engages the corner of it and it doesn't go all the way in. Really clever design. And yes, they do hold, although it's not the strongest hold in that design. This is a 4mm converter, same thing. Yep. This one's a little bit on the looser side, but still holds. And it will use many of the different bit driving extensions that you can find. This one's really cool. It has a 1/4-inch socket and then you slide it up like so. And it has a magnet, a little collar inside that holds standard hex bits. So this is a really neat little design. And yeah, that works, no problem. What about the ratcheting system from Leatherman, if you can get a hold of them? Yep, and notice it goes all the way in. No problem. It will be used with any of the extensions from Leatherman as well. And speaking of Leatherman, what about Leatherman bits? In fact, it's almost like they planned this or something. Yeah, it uses those bits, no problem. Goes all the way in, grabs with the magnet, good to go. So pretty much anything you currently have is going to work with this system. How about them apples? A minute just quickly to talk about add-ons. Now in my unboxing video, the first time around, I talked a lot more about them, and the ones I have pretty much all of them, I think. I think the only thing I don't have is the serrated blade. So I would refer back to that video in general. I'm not going to go into every single add-on that you have for this particular video because they don't come with the standard product. The one thing I do like though, and I think is worth mentioning, is the S35 VN additional blades. They are very reasonably priced. I think under $30, and having the ability to potentially either have 2 blades or just have an upgraded steel that you don't have to buy in a whole nother tool. I really, really like that. And the other tool that I find myself actually swapping out quite often for the blade is this safety cutter. Now, technically speaking, because it's not an exposed blade, it has different rules. It's not considered a knife blade. So you can put that in the goat tool and have what is essentially a complementary item to whatever folding knife that you have on hand. So that is something that I really think is a good option. So these two especially I would consider, and I would also maybe pick up one of these if you want to swap out the Allen wrench. You can actually get this as well. So I believe this is also an add-on that is not included with the package. And you don't really need these, okay? I have 3, so I figured it's worth doing this once. But my guess is that I'm never going to get through all of the cutters that it comes with because it's 3-sided. When you order some from, say, Leatherman and you bend a cutter, you have to replace the whole thing. These are going to last a lot longer because there's 3 different edges to work with. So maybe you get one, maybe you don't even bother, just simply for the fact that there's 3 cutting edges per cutter. That's a lot of longevity. Yeah, I'm just going to refer back to the original video on that. There's some items I didn't like as much, and so I think it's best to just go there. I'll put a link to that video down in the description and as well as the pinned comment. Go ahead and talk about the rest of the tools. Now, as I stated, we can fix this friction problem with a couple of different methods, including the polishing and the washers, but we're just going to ignore that for now. So 440C on the blade steel, a little bit better edge retention than 420HC, not quite as tough, but for blade purposes, nice little improvement. And this reminds me quite a bit of the original Leatherman Wave blade, sub 3 inches total, and you can actually get this in a non-locking variety if you choose to select that when you purchase it. So that's a really nice thing for places that don't allow locking blades. That is something really, really neat about the goat tool. Now on the inner side, we have 4 implements. Let me pull this out with my nail nick, and you'll see that every time this happens, I pull out everything, this deploys. So there's some tension, some adjustments that could be made to prevent this lock bar from opening every time you pull out an inner implement. It's not my favorite thing to have happen. So I think it's really just a matter of changing the geometry of this locking mechanism so that it takes more to engage and to rotate, so it doesn't overcome the spring quite as easily. So we'll talk about that maybe in a later video, but this is just something to point out that I wish that could be improved, and thankfully, because everything's modular, it wouldn't be that difficult. The first tool that we're looking at here is a reamer, which is basically something that can drill holes, and I kind of like the shape. This will probably be very good at striking a ferro rod because of that curvature, so nice little addition. You have a 2mm key, same thickness as the tool itself, so that's a nice little addition as well. Like I said, it will adjust the screws that it already has, but for me, on my personal version, the one that I've been carrying a lot, I've already replaced the screws with a Phillips driver to make it a little bit easier to modify. Now, we also have the flathead. I don't have any qualms with this one at all. It also has a standard hex hole on it as well, so if you needed to, you could use it to potentially tension something in like a T-handle orientation. I have my qualms about putting that much pressure on this, not this per se, but potentially this lock bar. I'm not sure I'd want to attempt it in that regard, but it's cool that it's there. So as long as you're not using too much tension, I think it'd be good to go. Now, I understand they were trying to get as much functionality out of their tools as possible, but it feels to me at least that this hex hole is kind of counteracting the usability of this very large flathead. I like this large flathead, especially if you're into doing things with camera equipment. There's always those large flat openings you need to adjust. Now, they don't need too much strength, but it feels like too much was given up in order to accommodate this additional potentially niche application. So I personally would like to get rid of this, and that's the thing. Because I can just remove tools, take that out, I could then replace it with, say, I don't know, this bottle opener, can opener. Boom, we're good to go. So real fast exchange, and so it kind of alleviates a lot of my concerns. I've already talked about it, but the saw, especially on the new one, it even seems to be a little bit better than the one that I looked at over here. Let me go ahead and pull that out. Oh no, it's about the same. Maybe it's just better than I thought it was. Saw, it's a pull cut saw. Nice big teeth on this one. Relatively sharp. It is thinner at the back side than it is at the teeth, which is what it should be. It should be tapered, which it is. And so you shouldn't have too many problems with that saw. And the last two implements to discuss. We have the craft blade holder. Now, one thing I love about, this is probably my favorite tool in the whole thing besides the bit driver, because you can take this out, and if I need to make precision cuts, like in the pen orientation, I can do that without having to hold the entire tool. And I really, really, really like the craft blade holder. I just like, this is one of my favorite things that they've added to this tool. And although not everything is perfect on the GOAT tool, I think the actual tool set is very, very good. Now let's finish this off with the scissor. Now, how good are the scissor? Well, one thing is they are kind of stout at the tip, so you're not going to do the precision cuts quite as easily. But when it comes to cutting geometry, they are still very, very good. At the tip, you're not going to have quite the stability to cut the paracord, but it does have the proper geometry for cutting. So if you have a thinner material, and we'll have to do an independent testing with this, you shouldn't have any problems. All in all, I'm actually pretty pleased with these scissors. Thing I can say for sure after carrying the GOAT tool for a period of time is that this is not a replacement to a Leatherman Wave or Swiss Tool MX Clip. It's weirdly in its own category. It's for a group of people who like to manipulate their tool and design it as they see fit. And it's there to support that interest. You can customize it with different scales. You can design different components that will function within it. The potential is great, but it's not going to be for everyone. That's pretty much just something you're going to need to accept. It's going to have little weird quirks that you'll have to overcome. It's not going to be one of these things that comes out of the box and is ready to go to, an outdoor adventure without actually understanding it a little bit better. So just keep that in mind, and I think you'll find a lot of enjoyment in the goat tool. Personally, I do. As someone who likes to tinker, this is exactly the thing that I have fun playing with. As always, guys, thank you so much for your time. I hope this was informative. Let me know down in the description if there's anything else you'd like me to cover as well. And of course, we'll talk again soon.